currently the CEO of Boldly Speaking. It is a company whose mission it is to transform the experience of women and people of color in the workplace. I do that through workshops, through speaking engagements, through ERG coaching, and through anything else that people are interested in. I'm pretty open in terms of like what people need help with, and I'm just I like sharing my expertise, my lived experience, and just hoping to make the people that usually are undervalued, underappreciated, and underrepresented feel like they are being celebrated in the workplace and feel like they are being seen and heard. I have brown hair. I'm Latina, like kind of a medium tone Latina. I have a light blue shirt on. And what I was gonna also share is that I was the head of equality at a major technology company, and I was laid off last year. So I lost my job probably before I think the whole like target on DEI came down. But we were definitely some of the first to be let go, and so that has been challenging, and finding work in this environment has been close to impossible. And so I started my business thinking that I was just going to do it to kind of hold me over for a little while, and it's been a year and a half, and here I am, and I'm trying to make it work. I really enjoy being a business owner, and anyway, so that's a little bit about me.
Congrats on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
I know it's not easy. We both, I mean, all of us know.
Yeah, this is not for the faint of heart, that's for
Not at
sure.
all.
In-house
Yeah.
DEI and big tech, man. Yeah, I'm Yong, they, them. I'm Taiwanese and have colorful hair that actually has some really cool layers right now. It's like blonde and purple and blue. This was completely accidental because I used an influencer's on hair product on accident. Turns out influencers can sell hair
It looks
products
nice though.
at fucking
I love it.
Sally's and not need a certification because they're influencers. So I accidentally
Oh
bought this
my
product and now
goodness.
my hair's all wild. Yeah, striped blue and white tank top. I am not as muscular as I would like to be in the summer, but that's okay. And yeah, I coach marginalized people on navigating their marginalizing environments. We have a lot of leadership programs and coaching programs that often don't come from in-identity people, and as a result, so many of us get coached at work, and it's like, hey, barge into that board meeting and tell them what's up, and it's like, not accessible or available to us. So I help folks navigate mostly situations of discrimination, which is unfortunate and draining, but also important and resourceful. And so, yeah, most of my clients are multiply marginalized, and almost everyone's autistic, and yeah, we're all just trying to survive out here. I also do some decency coaching, is what I call it. So just like helping the folks who have power be more decent and resolve situations. So I'm very problem specific. But yeah, that's me. This is Jose. There is also a cockatiel, a gray, green, and rosy-cheeked cockatiel behind me. He may interject at moments.
I was about to ask, does Jose talk?
Your coworker.
Yeah. I used to always bring my dog Miso, who's a border collie, into meetings, just like when I was working in tech. And she would just have the most opportune groans. Like the meeting would have a lull, or somebody would say something really exhausting, and Miso would just be like, like in the middle.
So expressive.
As opinionated.
I love that. That's adorable. The cutest coworker.
We all need a miso in our life. I would like to
Yes.
bring a dog like that to some meetings I go to.
Right? Just channeling
Yeah.
our inner thoughts.
Yeah, she pulls no punches.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you both for joining me again today. And I gave you a little bit of context. I think you both saw my post before. I reached out to you to see if you'd be up for talking about this, but someone had forwarded me an event, and the title of it was "Learn from Leaders," and it looks like it just passed actually. And the idea was that it was a virtual panel. And the topic was, does race translate? A cross-cultural exploration. And it said it was a 1 hour free live virtual workshop from, and I'm quoting, globally renowned thought leaders, practitioners, and academics from Spain, Brazil, and France. And so The invite said that they would be discussing race and racism around the world. The panel will describe how race and racism are fluid, shaping themselves to each country's contours of history and culture. Sounds almost like ChatGPT wrote that, but that's not my business. The point being that the panelists were all women, which, it doesn't happen often. So I was like, okay, we got a little diversity, but three of them were appear to be white women. And I'm just thinking to myself, how is it possible that we're having a global conversation about race and racism without a black person? How does that work? And it just really made me question things. And if not even that, someone of a much darker skin tone, because there's a lot of research that shows us, discrimination, racism occurs, of course, with like a significant amount with black and brown people. But depending on skin tone, colorism affects how you're treated as well. There's a lot of research behind that. So it just kind of stopped me in my tracks. I messaged the person that sent the invite, still haven't heard back. But I reached out and I was just like, this just doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right.
Right.
And so it just had me thinking. And I always have to do a little gut check on LinkedIn. And I'm like, am I losing it? And people are like, no, this does not make sense. And so I know that you two have also seen recent examples as well. Hadi, you'd sent, a LinkedIn post from someone who decided to back out of a panel because they
Yep.
felt as though there wasn't enough diversity. And then Young, I know you sent a massive panel of people, which also just my mind was like how are we still here in 2024? So I just wanted to give you all a moment to just kind of share your thoughts on kind of like the current state of diversity on panels, and this extends beyond just panels relevant to DEI from what I've seen.
Yep. Do you want to start?
I mean, sure.
Okay.
And just a quick note on the and sorry to interrupt the live stream, but there's on LinkedIn, I'm seeing that it says our event will start soon, so we might not.
Yeah, it wouldn't stream, so I just commented
got it,
and shared the YouTube link.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah, so we have a couple of people streaming with us.
Oh,
Hi,
right on.
YouTube folks. Thanks for
Yeah,
joining.
this is all new to me. So, and thank you for handling the technology. The a lot of the way that I kind of think and approach most things is like fairly systemic, and it's just like where my brain immediately goes. And so, I think when I think about when I see panels or when I see anything really that goes wrong, my thought goes straight to, what is the primary purpose of this thing, and what are the dynamics, and what are the marketplaces, and what are the incentives. And I think we can kind of decide not to go in those places in capitalism. Often we just kind of presume capitalism, right? And so when we think about panels and like what these panels are, I think we can take a step back and think like, well, what's the purpose of this? Like, what's the purpose of an event, right? The one that I shared, just for context, was a diversity summit that I believe is quarterly, at least multiple times a year, run by the Opal Group. No idea who they are, but they run these diversity panels. It was L&D, learning and development, and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. 35 speakers, which is a lot of speakers.
Yeah.
And it did appear diverse in many ways. There were various, shades of skin, but for the most part, nobody looked visibly queer, which is not to say that people need to look a certain way to be queer, but oftentimes there is diversity in appearance and presentation that
Yes.
was missing. And then nobody looked like me, or at least nobody was visibly like me, right? And that's a problem because it reinforces certain things, and those subtle reinforcements are actually more important than whatever the fuck we're talking about, in my opinion. But on top of that, we can then like dig in, and I made a post about this, like, to what the purpose is of this event. This is purely an L&D DEI summit. Almost everyone, because one of my coaching clients was in attendance, almost everyone was a speaker, which is always a little suspect to me and interesting. But then when we think about, like, I looked up the Opal Group, they throw events. It's an event business. So they do ticket sales, sponsorships, and exhibition fees, right? That is how they make money. So what they're going to be optimizing for is attendance and ticket sales. And oftentimes the way that you optimize for that is getting speakers who can draw their own audiences. So I'm thinking about those incentives. And when we take a step back and we think, well, the purpose of this is not to talk about DEI. The purpose of a trade conference is not to share insights and ideas necessarily. The purpose of a trade conference is to promote commerce and the marketplace. The who's hosting that? Is it an events group that is incentivized by throwing events and making revenue through that? Is it Salesforce doing, for example, Dreamforce and doing a trade conference? Their goal there is to enhance their platform business and to increase the marketplace business that they literally created, right? All marketplaces and platform fees originate from Salesforce. So that's what they're doing. And so we need to, I think, take a step back and think about the selection process and why those people are selected, because it's not for their insider information or incremental views. It's often for the audience they can bring, the ticket sales that they can generate, and the topics that they can raise from a marketing perspective. So that's my initial thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have I like what you said. I appreciate what you said a lot, and it's actually quite insightful. Maybe something that I had not necessarily thought of. I always just tend to feel like people, they're in their own little cocoon, and they don't even notice that they're leaving people out of the conversation. So you're giving people more grace than I am in many ways, because I just feel like people are like, they just don't know, like they don't see it. And I feel like as practitioners, as people who are probably, we all have lived experience being left out of conversations, we're we bring that lens to, that's the first thing you notice. And the truth is that before George Floyd was murdered, it was always all white panels, and maybe it was a white woman, and that's the end of that story. And it was just, it's things that we grew to accept because that's the reality, like we were always left out of conversations. And it was only after George Floyd was murdered and the DEI movement really picked up that we're like, and by the way, we're experts on stuff too. You could also like include us in the conversation. We got something to say as well. And it doesn't just have to be about DEI. It could be about sales. It could be about marketing. It could be about customer advocacy. It could be about anything. We have experts, all of us here. We're all represented in all the places and all the spaces, and we should be able to be part of conversations. I know as a Latina woman, I almost never see myself on a panel. Almost never. Like sometimes I'll see a Black woman and I'm like, yay, they included a Black woman, yay. But like obviously there's more work to be done. Or I'll see like an Asian woman and I'm like, okay, that's good. Like there's an effort being made here. I still don't see myself, and I still feel left out of the conversation, but I can tell that people have made a conscious effort. Obviously, if you're going to have a panel of 3 people, it's very hard to include every intersectionality in a panel of 3. In a panel of 35, or in a conference or an event of 35, then you have no excuse, because at that point you literally could be saying, okay, let's make sure we've included this, we've included that. Let's, we can dot our I's and cross our T's. I will tell you that I belonged to a women's ERG in a previous company where I worked, and we ended up we created a position called intersectionality chair, and that person's job was literally to make sure that as we ran events, as we had panels, as we did things, that we always had intersectionality represented in what we were doing, and that it wasn't just a white lady, always being front and center, and that we were including other voices. And to me, that was such, like I almost feel like everybody needs that, because meaning they need someone who is there with intention and whose role it is to really ensure that there's intersectionality being being represented in the group. And I do feel like, I know we weren't perfect, but I feel like that ERG got a lot better at welcoming people into the spaces, because they made a very conscious effort to include other voices than what had been included up to that point, which was predominantly, it's not a secret that women ERGs are mostly white women. That's like most companies, that's what you could expect. And the little maybe sprinkle of something else, not always see themselves represented in the conversation. And so I felt like we made a very nice impact in how we were having conversations, who we were engaging, and people feeling a little bit more represented. I think it's important. So that's the role I try to play. And the last comment I'll make is that I feel like I talked earlier about like we bring that lens to this because it's very like for us it's so obvious. It's like, oh my God, like how is this a diverse panel? Like you're calling this diversity? No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so obvious. And I feel like it's like a blessing and a curse. Like it's a blessing that you see it, but it feels like a curse because you're like immediately no. Like
Yeah.
that's just the first thing that comes to me. I'm like, no, this is not a diverse panel. Like where who thought this was diverse? Like I want to talk to that person. But anyway,
Yeah.
it feels like you can't unsee it and you see it everywhere and it's so obvious, so obvious. And I do feel like every team, when you don't include different people, that's what you're missing. You're missing the people
Yeah.
that can tell like in a minute that it's something's missing. We can see it in a
Yeah.
second. We look and we're like, okay, it's missing. We already know. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when you have these groups of people that are very similar, that's a blind spot that they could have. And yeah, so it just builds a case for having, that expertise, people with lived experience on your team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes me actually think of another conversation that I've been wanting to have around just like how exhausting DEI work is outside of you actually doing the work. Because to your point, Hadi, um, I'm constantly thinking about things like this. I had a friend like a few months ago be like, "Don't you get tired of thinking about this?" I'm like, "Yes, but I can't help it. My brain just
Yeah,
looks at something and I'm like, why didn't anyone else think about this? Like I'm not consciously
don't
half the
they
time
see
I'm
it?
trying to turn it off,
Yeah,
right? But
it's mental load.
you yeah, you just get into this space where you're just like, I want people to feel included. Like, and I think there's a lot to be said about our own lived experiences too, and having that feeling of exclusion. To your point of looking at panels, I don't know. Yeah, I see black women like myself almost never. I see black women on panels, but often I feel like they're kind of picking and choosing the same types of people with a similar identity. I see often similar socioeconomic statuses and types of
Yep.
people. I never see anyone with my hair texture, for example, which is a conversation I'm having later this week. Around that, where it's just still not deemed acceptable to have natural hair. So usually when I see a black woman on a panel, they are straight
Mm.
hair, they have extensions, they have some chemical process. Like it's very rare, and that may seem simple and trivial to some people, but it's those small things that matter to people. Looking at a panel and seeing someone with a physical disability, a panel of 35, and I don't visually see anyone with a physical disability. Why? And we're talking about diversity. How? It
Yeah.
doesn't really make sense to me. So with that, I'm just curious, what do you think what are some factors that might be stopping people from being intentional about diversifying their panels? Because to me, it doesn't seem like money. If you're able to bring in 35 speakers, that can't be the case. You have the resources. So what's the excuse?
Oh, I wonder if there's even like honorariums for a lot of these, right? Like, I mean,
Fair?
I I get asked often to speak, and I'm like, cool, like, what's the situation? And it's like, well, you're going to be a keynote speaker, and I'm like, okay, how many keynote speakers are there? And it's like, well, 30, great. How many speakers are there? 30, great. So everyone's a keynote, and that's such a red flag, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
communicates to me, oh, you're trying to incentivize me by my ego, right? Or
Right.
you're trying to
Right.
incentivize me through validation, through representation, through and knowing that DEI practitioners, especially within this economy of the DEI marketplace, which is now matured into commercialization, knowing that we're all thirsty, right? That everyone's
Mm-hmm.
desperate for water, like it becomes a really easy transaction to then say, like, yeah, we're not going to pay you anything, but maybe you can get some business from this reach, right? Like
Yep.
it becomes this incentive structure, this marketplace that is really more incentivizes, I think, validation and the potential for reach, which also comes with the potential for money and business.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that becomes very alluring. So even otherwise, highly valued practitioners or practitioners who operate on high values, that incentive becomes pretty powerful and strong to join a panel that you may object to. And I think that is the transactional exchange that happens. I think there is interest convergence. To Hadi's point, post George Floyd, DEI had a boom. I don't think that is anything but a new marketplace and an interest
Mhm. Mhm.
convergence, right? white people were stuck at home during COVID and needed something to feel passionate about, and that converged with the needs of racialized people. Um,
Yep.
we need to maintain sight on that difference, though, because just because they converge doesn't mean that they don't diverge, and that's what's happening now. Which means when we look back at the panels, even in 2020, we need to understand who was the serving, what was the purpose. If it was a white organized thing, which most institutions are white, to your point, Adriele, who is being selected is going to be whoever has been cherry picked to fit into the existing narrative, not buck conventions, not create division, right? Divisiveness is
Yes.
such a common term.
Yes.
And so we end up selecting for the people who most represent the existing institution. And I think there is both knowing compromise, which I detest, and then there's
Right.
also duress, right? If you're like just dying for business because you got to feed your kids, yeah, you might take that spot, and you might not object to that panel not including any Black people, as an
Right.
example.
Right.
And that compromise, I think, is really nuanced and easy to blame. But then we look at the institution and we think, well, they're the ones holding the power. That's who we need to be attacking, in my opinion.
Do you think there's room, and this isn't just for you, Young, but
Of course.
also Hadi, if you have thoughts on this, but do you think there's room for people to be transparent around that? Like to say, I recognize that I'm probably contributing to the problem, but, I have to pay my bills and things are hard.
Yes. There's room, but there's no honesty in DEI.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There's no honesty. People are afraid to be honest.
Yeah.
People are all under duress and afraid, and specifically financial duress, which is one of the most powerful elements of duress in American capitalism. So, like, yeah, you talk to 10 DEI practitioners about their businesses. I don't think you're getting a ton of truth, right? Because a lot of people also feel like they need to represent themselves as being very successful in order to get business. Also, because we know that institutions typically look at, well, who else have you worked for? They're operating off of FOMO. So, like, yeah, I think there's room, but I think the incentives create a situation where it's really hard for people to be authentic in DEI on both sides.
That's true when you're getting paid, and I'm not talking about an honorarium because that's usually not a lot of money. So, but I would say like at conferences, at least for me, where I am in my journey, I'm not getting paid to speak at conferences for the most part. I get an honorarium if I'm lucky. Otherwise, I just get my T&E paid, and that's the end of that story. And it's really, I'm doing it for exposure. So in those cases, I feel like you can be a little bit more bold and say like, well, who else is going to be here, part of the panel, or, and like sometimes I don't know who's part of the panel until like we have the pre-meeting, and it's like, that's when I see who's part of the panel. And I'm like, okay, so I see I'm the token Latina. Get it. Got it. Gotcha. I understand now what's happening, or not, it depends. But like, I can give you an example. Last year, I was invited to be part of this company was doing like they were selling their business. So it was in that, like how you said Salesforce has Dreamforce kind of vibe. Like this was a technology company, not Salesforce, and they were selling their technology, and they had I think they were making an effort. They actually had a whole D&I, diversity and inclusion kind of, what do you call that? Like a pillar. So they might have had like sales, diversity and inclusion, building your book of business. Like they had different. Sales. Say it again.
I was like real good for ticket sales.
Yeah. So they had, so exactly. But let me tell you what happened. So I got invited to be part of this panel. I was the only Latina. There were 2 other white women on the panel, and nobody came to our session. Like we had like 2 people. And that's because they had competing sessions going on at the same time, and no one wanted to come to ours. And I feel like the person who ran that, who the company that they hired and the people we were working with were white. The people who attended the conference were mostly white attendees. Now it happens that the owner of the business is a Latino. So I think that's how D&I ended up as a pillar. I think he was trying, and I think their heart was in the right place. I feel like it was not something that people were naturally drawn to, and so nobody came. And so like I remember sitting there being like, I flew all the way out here. We've been planning this thing for months. They spend money on a hotel and my plane to come here, and like two people came. And I was like, what could we have done differently? Like there has to have been something that could have been done differently. And I kind of feel like it would have been nice if people, I don't want to say didn't have a choice, but that like they, that we didn't have like someone competing with us. And it was like an interesting thing. I remember that it was like something, they were like, well, we have like competition. We were like joking. We're like, wow, we got stiff competition. And it was like, yeah, everybody went to the other thing and no one came to us. And like there was like, two people who came, and like one of them was like, I really wanted to come. It was like as soon as I saw the D&I track, I wanted to make sure I came to support you. And, I was really interested to hear what y'all were going to talk about. And anyway, I think about that, and I'm like, even when you do it, you got to do it right. Because if you don't do it the right way, you still might not get the desired outcome. And that's really important, because it's like, when you go volunteer in another country, it's like, that's not always good. Like there could be harm caused. I'm not saying there was harm caused in this case, but like we didn't achieve the desired outcome, even though like from the optics, it was like, oh my God, this diverse panel about this diverse topic. Yay. Like awesome. And it was like, wah, wah, because like no one came.
Right.
Can I double click that real quick?
Yeah.
Please.
So when we talk about the desired outcome, right? I think this can be interest divergence. The desired outcome that we might have as marginalized people and as DEI practitioners who want to promote these things, help them gain credibility, help them gain nuance, inform people. That's our primary directive, right? That's our goal coming into this. Although plenty of individuals will have their own separate goals.
I was excited to talk to white salespeople. I'm like, this is going to be the first time I talk to somebody
oh
that
my God,
is not.
miserable.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, I was excited, but then nobody came.
Right. Well, and you're excited because like, oh, great, finally we can have an audience with the people with power who actually are the ones who can drive change, right? That's exciting.
Right.
But then when we think about the primary purpose of the event organizers, as you mentioned, they're there to sell their platform and their product. They're there to promote their business. And DEI was a vertical, but it sounds like was a vertical that was completely sidelined, right? And when we then think about conferences and event organizers, I used to throw events. My ex was the event organizer for like all of the company that we worked for that got bought by Oracle. And so also I got a lot of free swag for that, which was awesome. But these conferences, these events are highly curated, right? There is an intentional series of conversations for scheduling. What are the main headliners? Like you go to any music festival, right? You're not putting Stevie Wonder right next to, I'm trying to think of like a contemporary. You're not putting Stevie Wonder and Kendrick Lamar on stage at the same time, right? You're putting Stevie on Sunday, Kendrick on Saturday, because you know that they're bringing an audience and you want to separate that out, and you're drawing out and spreading out the ringers, right? And then you're putting the smaller bands in between. It's like getting the 3 a.m. commercial slot on TV. And so this is an intentional conversation. And so I would be so curious to see what the competing stages were and what the competing events were on those other stages, because that's not ignorance, right? That is not an unintended consequence. That is an intentional scheduling. Multiple event organizers, probably cis white women, sat in a room and decided what was going to go when, and decided to put you in that slot, which was clearly undesirable. And so I think we can take a look at the incentives and again, what the primary purposes of that event to adjudicate, one, how we explain what ended up happening, which is a DEI panel that had nobody show up. And we can work backwards to understand, well, was that intentional, or was that thought of, was that a known consequences, or was that literally what they strategized for? We won't know, but what we do know is that that's what happened. And we do know that there was intent behind those scheduling decisions.
Yeah. I'll just add on, like, I've seen this happen so many times. And I actually helped organize an event very similar it was a whole company-wide offsite. And it took forever for the organizers to even agree that there could be a time slot for a DEI conversation. And they gave the group one of the smallest time slots possible. it overlapped with two or three other things that were going on, which were, of course, tech forward, really relevant to the company's, mission, vision, all of those things, right? And so there was hardly anyone in the room. And, it actually was harmful because there were a lot of people internally who were fighting for that, who wanted that session to happen, who were hoping for people to come in, especially decision makers. And I think at one point, one leader popped their head in for a second just to be like, hey, I'm showing face. Didn't stay for the session, didn't take anything away from it, didn't leave anything meaningful with the group. And it was just really unfortunate. And it happens time
Yeah.
and time again. And, when I hear something like sales, like the fact that we still haven't made the connection that DEI should inherently be something you're thinking about when you're trying to sell things.
1,000%. We drew
Like,
so many connections. We're like, here's how you do it as a manager. Here's how you do it when you're working with
yeah.
customers. Here's how you do it when you're leading people. Like all the things. We connected all the dots, and then
Hmm.
no one was there to hear about
Yeah.
all the things we discovered and uncovered.
Yeah, I think I honestly, I think, I do a lot of facilitation these days. And one thing I notice is that there are so many people, especially in leadership, that have not made the connection of how DEI should be and can be integrated into their work. And it's mind blowing to me. And I think part of the issue is that a lot of times people are getting the same sort of regurgitated information over and over. It's often about informing people. We've done the informing. And yes, you still got a level set at the beginning of a conversation, but what are the actions that we're going to take? What can I actually be doing? And, I find myself sometimes frustrated as a practitioner when people are like, yeah, I support this. I want to do something. I just don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. It's not rocket science. I promise you. We're not brain surgeons. like, like it's some of the simplest things at times. Sometimes it's just showing up, for people on your team that are working hard. Sometimes it's acknowledging when someone is constantly being talked over and helping create room for them. It's just these small little acts that we're just doing as humans. Who I know I'm on live, so I have to censor myself. Who cares about identity sometimes? It's just a simple fact that we are all humans. Like, respect people and help create respectful spaces for people, right? And I'm talking mostly directly to leaders right now because I often see people leaders falling short on this when it's sometimes just the simplest acts of just making a respectful space for people. So I do want to pause here for a moment because I see a couple comments on YouTube. Leandra, thanks for joining us. Leandra says, what does quote unquote exposure get us if everyone's goal is just to sell you something? I feel like my involvement is always more about what the company I work for, um, I'm assuming, wants or needs than it is about me or my expertise. Leandra also added, two people, the nerve. People are will almost always choose comfort if given the option. And then someone named Presh, thank you for joining us, said, it is sad that people don't care about these important issues. Agreed. But any thoughts about the exposure piece? What does exposure get us if everyone's goal is just to sell you something?
That's the question, right?
Right?
Like that's the and maybe we're not cursing. So that's the effing question. Like I think again, I'll point to something completely orthogonal that I think most of us can probably relate to, which is I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with other DEI folks where I go in and then realize, oh, they think I'm a demand center and they're seeking demand for their supply. And it's like,
Tell us
I'm
more.
always happy to connect with other practitioners because I think just as colleagues, it's important for us to share our experiences, ideas, we improve, right? In connection with each other.
Yeah.
Especially because there are so many different modalities with this work. There's so many different areas of this work that like we can't possibly cover all of them. So that's incredibly
Right.
important. But so many conversations between practitioners is to suppliers mistaking the other person for a demand center and seeking demand. And I've seen this a lot. I've experienced this a lot. And I think going into DEI, so many of us don't come from business backgrounds. A lot of us come from academic backgrounds. People don't, understand some of the, industry realities, like content marketing is not research, and these various other things that so many of us just become susceptible to because we are such a different demographic than the typical business demographic.
Mm.
And as a result, that can mean people not knowing how to build a sales funnel or a pipeline. And so again, what I end up seeing is so much thirst and so much seeking of, you know, business without necessarily a ton of like measurement or strategy. And so exposure is incredibly appealing, right, for anyone who is like not seeing success with their, you know, business development strategies. Hey, you can go speak on this panel and it might be new audience members, new people who, new potential buyers. And yet that's also, you know, often preying on a misunderstanding of what that panel is there to do and who's actually going to be paying attention to that panel, and if anyone actually has dollars that they want to spend. I think the other side that makes exposure so alluring for so many people is the validation component. I think DEI fundamentally is a validation exchange in most practices. In other words, white people want to be validated, tell me I'm a good white person. The marginalized person has spent an entire lifetime being invalidated their whole lives. And now all of a sudden, after 2020, they're all of a sudden an expert in their experiences, where historically we're not experts in our own experiences. Our experiences are defined for us. It's incredibly fucking addictive to have someone say, we want you to be a keynote speaker on the subject of your life. And everyone in the audience is there to hear you. How incredibly addictive is that? And so I think exposure is, it gives us validation.
Yeah.
And we mistake that for value.
1,000% what you just said. What I will add is that I also feel like our journeys as in terms of developing our business as speakers can also be quite different. So I know I had like a white coach. I'll call him a coach. He was like a mentor. That's a better word. A white man, white cisgender man was my mentor. He was like, why don't you become like a keynote speaker at one of these, you know, the conferences? I'm like, because I'm just starting. What are you talking about? And then he was like, yeah, like, and then like I talked to another guy. He was like, yeah, I usually charge between 10 and 15,000. I'm like charging 500. I'm like, so I think our experience is just very different. And so like we're stuck on this exposure part of our journey for a lot longer than other people, because other people just have the privilege of walking onto a stage and saying, okay, give me $15,000, I'm here. And that is definitely not our experience. We're like justifying. I'm surprised I don't pay to be part of these things. You know, I think some people would charge me if they could. So I right now I'm about 1.5 years into my business, and I feel like my price has gone up. So I feel like I know a little bit better what I'm worth, quote unquote. I'm probably worth more than I'm charging, but I'm kind of working my way up. And I feel like I also still pay attention to, like, if there's, let's say, as an example, the Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers was like, we would like you to come and speak at our conference. They're a nonprofit, and we'll fly you out, but we don't have money for you. I would probably do it for free or for a small fee, like an honorarium, because I'm going to have a reach to a lot of young people in my community. And that's the community that I prefer to talk to the most, like that I feel that will relate most to my experience. And I want to have an impact. Now, if like Google knocked on my door, or Amazon or Meta, and was like, come talk in our conference for free, I'm like, oh, hell no. You're going to have to pay me not only what I think I'm worth, but maybe even a little bit more so that I could afford to take that other free conference for when I end up really talking to, you know, the people in my community that probably need to hear my message even more. So I try to balance that. It's not perfect, and I'm still like kind of navigating those waters, but that's kind of where I feel like I'm at. Like, I always charge corporate a little bit more because I know they have more budget, and I'll ask them, what's your budget? If your budget is 10,000, then guess what? That's what you're going to get charged, because you have the money for it. Versus if your budget is $500, I understand. And sometimes for $500, I could do it. Sometimes I can't. Last year for Hispanic Heritage Month, I had a lot of nonprofits and small companies come to me at the last minute. They're like, we only have $1,000. I'm like, for $1,000, I'm telling you what I'm talking about. And this is what I'm going to tell you exactly how it's going to work out, because I'm just doing cookie cutter for you. That's what you're going to get for $1,000. We're not going to have a conversation about who your audience is and what they need and what you want and what you're hoping for, because I don't have time for that. I'm going to give you what I can give you. I think it's good value, but like, I don't have time to customize it or tailor it for you.
Yeah.
But if you're going to pay more, then I will spend the time doing more customization and personalization for whatever your objectives are. So that's kind of how I've done it. But I do still do things for exposure, and like it's on a case by case basis. But I do feel that our journey and like being in that exposure stage is a little extended for
Mm-hmm.
members of marginalized communities relative to, say, a white cisgender male who might be on that journey for like a hot minute, and then he's like, hot diggity dog, cashing in.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to be. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'll just add like one, I think there's a lot to be said about white men mentoring historically less represented people, and I don't see it happening enough because they have a lot of insight and a lot of access to things that we do not. So if you're a white man watching this, or if you know of a white man that could mentor people, encourage them to go mentor, and even if they can't mentor, sponsor. Speak names in rooms where we are not there. Please help us out, right? Like
The
that
other
is what
thing
we're looking.
too,
We need
it's
help on.
it's a very valuable learning experience for them, because half the time they're like, what? how
Yes,
how much are
yes,
you charging? I'm like, yes, that's how I'm barely getting that.
yes,
And
yes.
so it's educational. They learn like how the other side
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a lot to be said around, I just shared for us, and maybe I'll share this on with the in the event page as well. But someone, I can't remember the person's name, so sorry, but I believe it might be tagged in here. But there's a spreadsheet from last year of DEI consulting fees compiled by white allies. So I remember when I first saw that, and I was like, I am significantly undercharging because one, I have more experience than some of these folks that are charging ridiculous fees. On top of that, I'm also doing this emotional tax because I can't tell you the amount of times that I've had to navigate really sticky situations as a Black
Yep.
woman where I have to keep it together because otherwise I'm going to be seen as the angry Black woman who's coming in, yelling, berating us about unconscious bias, and everyone shuts down and doesn't actually listen to me. So there's also an extra charge for that part too, right?
Yep.
Or coaching people where I allow them to ask me very intimate details about my experiences that they wouldn't just be able to ask anyone about. So if you need help talking about pricing, I'm happy to talk about it. But I think it's really important to make sure that we are charging for what we're worth, even within the nonprofit space. Like there is a lot, I've seen nonprofits pay lots of money to white individuals. Um, and then the last thing that I wanted to highlight before we start to wrap up here is I don't know if this has happened to you all, but I've had experiences, less so with speaking, but more so like workshop facilitation, where I've been asked to co facilitate with a white person, a white counterpart. And the only
Like,
the
if you
only
didn't pick that person,
explanation,
go ahead.
but like the only explanation for it is like what y'all were talking about earlier is like, we're doing this for the comfort to make you feel more comfortable. And in the end, I find myself speaking more during the session and being more relatable and having a easier time connecting with people because I've done this for so long, because I know how to navigate and interact with different types of people, because it hasn't just been a professional experience for me, it's
Because
been
you're an
lifelong.
expert.
It started when I was a kid. I didn't know what I was doing. I just did it. I was put in rooms with different people. And so I didn't just decide, oh, hey, I'm going to be a DEI practitioner. It just kind of fell into my life. But I just find that funny. And I just had to throw that out there because I'm
Can,
like, I'm good by myself. Thank you. But
can
sure.
I can I throw in a quick story to
Please.
like tag
Yes.
onto that?
Yes. Yes.
So one of our colleagues who I'm sure you both know, Adriele, I definitely know that you know them.
Mm-hmm.
I became friends with kind of on LinkedIn, and because we have similar values and ideals and in areas of this work. This person's a PhD. They're like super badass. One of my preferred practitioners. And our first interaction was actually in a workshop setting for a company that I was consulting for and kind of coaching their team. And they brought us all into like this DEI thing, and it was this woman who I highly value, but it was
Mm-hmm.
with a company that she was contracting with, and the entire time, for me and for other marginalized people in our own little chat group, we were just like, oh my god, this poor woman who clearly wants to speak up when that one known racist uncle, right, decided to ask the rhetorically racist question. Like, you can
Mm.
see it in her face that she is dying, not being able to say something because this white presenting guy over here is meeting that to maintain the learning environment, right? Is doing the whole like, we're just going to give this credibility and normalcy because we need to focus on maintaining a learning environment and we can't upset the white people. And that's what that's what it sets us up for.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to share with you who that was, by the way, but I'll do it offline.
I think I have a feeling, but
I also have a little bit of a story. I'm doing something. I'm being part of a panel.
Mhm.
I'm going to be part of a panel. I can't get the words out. And we were told that the audience is going to be conservative, and I'm like, okay, like I'm not. So what does that mean? I'm not really sure. And then like when we were doing the rehearsal part, someone was like, well, I guess I'll focus on this part because that feels like it's going to be a little bit more tolerated by the group. And I was like, time out. I'm like, when y'all said the audience was conservative, were you trying to tell us that we should police what we're saying, or was that just an FYI? I wasn't, because I didn't get the memo. Like, I'm like, am I supposed to like not say what I want to say, or because I felt like that's what this other panelist was offering. They were like, I'll kind of just I'll keep it nice and easy. So and they were like, no, that's not what we're saying. I was like, okay, I just wanted to make sure I heard right, because I thought it was just a data point. I didn't realize that now we were supposed to change our script and like come up with like different content based on their conservatism. And I'm not really sure. Like at the end of the day, I'm curious to see how it's going to go. And I'm like, I'm going to say what I'm going to say. So I say the same thing wherever I go. Like I just try to come, with sharing very basic information and also insights that, I think people might not be aware of. And I think to me, that's interesting. And that's an opportunity to learn. And even if you're conservative, we're here to learn new things. I feel like even if it's a learning, I'm not saying I'm going to change your mind about anything, but I don't feel like I should change the things that I'm going to say and how I, express myself and the experiences that I choose to share as examples. I would never, I hope that the expectation is never that we would have to change those. But that's interesting. It's all about, like you said, comfort, making people. It's always about like how do we I guess don't stir the pot too much. And it's like, well, are we having the conversation or are we having it? Like I don't know. Why are we having the panel then?
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of times people conflate, and I talk about this often, discomfort and feeling unsafe. They are not the same thing.
The stress is not trauma, yo.
They're like, I feel so unsafe in this conversation. No, you feel uncomfortable. You are perfectly safe. I promise. Nothing's going to happen. You might have a hard time articulating how you feel. It might be difficult to be vulnerable in the moment. You may not want to hear what I've experienced or what other people have experienced, but this is the reality of it. And so you either choose to push past that discomfort, not unsafety, or not,
I like that. That's a really good, I like that too. That distinction is very powerful.
Can we have a watch party for that and just do an over under on whether you get your mic cut? Because I
pull the plug.
At what point, right? I'm gonna guess 10 minutes of total like hottie speaking time before they do that. I've had my mic cut.
But also, I need to hear that story one day.
What is the purpose of a DEI panel facing conservatives? Like, I think again, asking and getting to the primary purpose will help, even just like emotionally or mentally prepare for that, but also identify like, cool, what are their incentives going to be? What are they going for? To your point, exactly, comfort. You don't engage conservative audiences, hostile audiences on a topic expecting to change their minds.
Well, that's what I was curious about. I'm like, and then are we going to be safe, or are we going to get are we under attack? Like, what's going to happen? So I am kind of curious to know how things are going to play out.
And they should be providing you with like, if they're going to say, hey, this is a conservative audience. Okay, cool. So number one, does that mean, to your point, that you want me and other people to adjust how we're speaking? And if so, I have to make a decision if this is something I actually want to do.
Correct.
And then the second thing is, okay, what are you going to do to protect me? If someone steps out of line, are you removing them from the combo? Are you interjecting? Like, what's the protocol here? Because you don't want to be in that situation where you're like
1,000%. I am like concerned. I'm like, I feel like they will. We will be, they're moderating, so I feel
Yeah.
confident that it's not going to get to that point.
I would
But it
totally bet against that.
but it is a precarious situation.
Yeah.
It
I would
always
say
is.
just ask them, like bring it up before it happens, just to say like, just thinking ahead. Just want to know if you have any, precautions in place, because I don't this work is stressful enough. You don't want to have to
Yeah.
stress over, something like a speaking engagement. Like there's enough others. You got to worry about accounting
Yeah,
and
I'm not going
logistics
to
and
modify what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like that's
that
not
part.
an option.
This is such
Yep,
a good
I hear you.
follow-up topic, which is like, do these types of panels and does DEI content at large ultimately cause more pain?
Mm,
Because what happens when you don't get protected, which at least from my purview, what I've seen, the DEI people that I coach, it is almost always the case
yeah.
that you are going to experience harm and risk in that scenario. And what does that mean for the few marginalized colleagues in that room when they watch the speaker get attacked by their colleagues who they now have no plausible deniability that that person is in fact racist or bigoted in whatever way?
Right.
When that person receives complete impunity for that, maybe even encouragement for that, what is the ultimate net impact on the marginalized people in that organization?
Yep.
I'm convinced that 95% of DEI does harm, but that's a completely different conversation.
Oh gosh. All right, Young. We're gonna have to have another.
On that
Like,
note,
we're gonna have to schedule another one. I know we're at time, and we didn't get to talk too much about strategies, but if you could, in like 30 to 60 seconds, what are some things that you would advise people to do? Kind of going back to our original topic of being intentional about panel selection.
I think my suggestion would be have someone whose role it is to just assess that's their ongoing role, is to be like, are we being inclusive? Do we have as much intersectionality on the panel as we can have given the number of panelists? Or if it's an event, have we done our research? Don't be lazy. Don't be lazy and just pick the same cast of characters. Go a little bit out of the box. Ask people for references, or get curious and bring in people that maybe you haven't worked with in the past.
Yeah. So maybe like rehire some of those DEI folks that y'all laid off.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Just saying.
I've only seen one success story of a panel actually changing, and it was actually with the resistance of two queer people, a cis gay black man and a cis gay white man.
Okay.
And I pointed out the complete lack of East Asians on this like out in tech panel. Nate Shalev, who is a white person who is autistic, who is a they them. As soon as I got to Nate, who's consulting, Nate made it happen. We changed the representation from 0 to 4 out of like 20 speakers in 2 days. Wow. So it can be done, and I'm convinced that the only reason that happened is because Nate was open to it.
Yes.
And y'all know I call out a lot of non-diverse panels.
Yep.
It's not that they don't know how. They don't need a playbook. To circling all the way back to earlier, they don't need to be fucking told what to do. They just need to actually want to do it. And the way we change that is incentives. And as long as there is a sea of people willing to speak on exclusionary panels, they will always default to that.
Yep.
So we as practitioners need to refuse. And that's a really, really hard thing to do, given that we are all under financial duress or marketplace duress at the very least.
Yeah. I'll just add to kind of wrap us up here. And this, Hadi, this reminds me of the post you sent. This person named Matthew Skelton was supposed to be on a panel talking about evolving organizational structures for agility. So these are not DEI practitioners. So I want to just add that as an example. But this person reposted this panel to say, I had to withdraw from this event due to the lack of speakers who are not men. And while honestly looking at the panel, it could have been even more diverse. He, could comment on intersectionality beyond that. I think we need to see more of that. Someone taking an active stance. You don't need to be a DEI practitioner, but if you are being invited to a panel, whether you're a software engineer, a salesperson, whoever, take a look and say, okay, I'm here with this perspective. Am I just going to be in an echo chamber with people who are sharing the same thoughts on this panel? Or is it possible that we could switch it up? And if so, make it known that you're taking a stance, because that, I think, is ultimately going to change. And especially white men who are predominantly the ones in leadership still, if you could take a stance, there's opportunity there to switch things up. So,
Amen.
any last minute plugs, things y'all want to tell the folks, things you want to share out, shout out?
I got to run to another thing. So
Thanks for joining.
bye. Yeah,
Bye.
Hadi,
thanks so much. This is
anything
great.
to add?
I will just say that as a Hispanic speaker, and I would love to be hired outside of Hispanic Heritage Month. But Hispanic Heritage Month is around the corner, so don't forget your sister. Don't forget me. I have some fun things happening, and I would love for people, your audience, to follow me and learn more about what I do. So thank you for
Awesome,
having
awesome.
me. I appreciate
You'll
you.
find Hattie's info tagged along with Young's and mine as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. Let us know if you have any other thoughts. You can add to the comments, and I'll see you back here soon. Thanks so much.
Peace.